Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to February 2021's Inner Circle. As usual, I am your host, Chris Ames from Cervello Financial Planning. Before we start digging a bit deeper into the case study, let's have a bit of a round robin and see who we've got in the room, starting with Ian.
Which one?
Ian Brayshaw. I'm guilty of doing this. I always forget that there might be two people with the same name. Ian Brayshaw we'll start with.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, great to be here again. My company is very limited. We deal with change and compliance. So if you've got any change headaches or compliance conundrums, we can help smooth the way for you.
Russ, can you just mute Paul for me, just while Ian's speaking, so that when it shows on the screen, we've got here. Ian, talk to me a little bit about the work that's keeping you busy at the minute.
There's a couple of things. I'm doing a set of both internal and external compliance communication for a social media consultant.
Okay.
And because of the power of virtual, that this lady is in Wetherby in Yorkshire. Would never have had that client.
Where did you meet?
Networking.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Good stuff.
And the other one, I'm still working with the same client, trying to get his documentation sorted so he can get his consumer credit license. We're coming to the end of that, but we've got the case manager now assigned by the FCA, so it should be a couple of months now, and then it'll be moving on to the next stage.
Yeah, that process, direct engagement with the FCA, don't expect it to be quick.
No.
But you know what? It's interesting because we're doing some work about changing our permissions, increasing our permissions as a business at the moment, and there's a lot of negative publicity regarding the FCA. They've been really good in terms of engaging. You know, if you get a good caseworker, actually, they're not too bad.
Yeah, no, absolutely spot on. You know, as I've been calling up through the process. Because as you know, Chris, some of the terminology is just in the world of its own. But trying to get them to explain it, you can get some people that just say, well, that's the way you do it.
Yeah.
So what does it mean?
Yeah. Translating the FCA guidance and the guidebook is, I mean, that's a job on its own. We employ compliance people just to break it down into practical language. But if you get somebody good there, they're normally quite appreciative. Appreciate that. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate that. Janet, talk to me about you. Introduce yourself to everybody and everybody watching the video, and tell us what's going on in your world.
Sure. Janet Smythe, inline accounts. So yeah, working with small businesses and small traders, quite a variety of sectors that we deal with. Been really automating as much as we can at the moment to smooth the way with what's going on at the moment. We don't really like taking that bag of receipts anymore, and so we're working to automate as much as we can. We're using Xero, big Xero users. We use auto entry to bring all our data in. Once we've got all that, then we can work with the business to give them good reporting, good planning, good forecasting. So that's where we sit. Very busy time. On top of that, we've got all our furloughing going on, which has been my needle inside at the moment, which I don't enjoy doing. I don't like, because I'm par with pensions. So, but needs must. Crack on.
I mean, it keeps me in work, Janet. Pensions. I don't. Why? Just out of interest, what is it about pensions you don't like? I mean, we can get on to furlough.
It's not interesting, is it? It's really not interesting. It's just like process, isn't it? It's just like, moving this to there.
Yeah, you're talking about the AE stuff, aren't you? The regulatory stuff.
We don't get anything exciting in that, do we? So it's really just processing. So no, don't enjoy that. Don't want to do that.
Yeah,
did sign up for that.
But that's like all payroll related stuff, isn't it? It is a process, and you want to move away from that to do the management stuff. And what do you think is going to happen with furlough moving forward?
Well, I didn't think they would extend it this long. So I mean, it's already to the end of April. I wouldn't have thought they'd extend it beyond that. I mean, you'd hope we'd be getting some sort of normality back by sort of summertime. So I don't think they'll extend it, but I suppose just a lot of it depends on, you know, what's happening in the industries. I mean, I've got companies that are, you know, they're completely shut down. Without the furlough, they'd have had to make all them people redundant. So, you know, I think it was essential for them companies to survive and people to stay employed, but beyond April, no.
Yeah, I suppose the challenge you've got is, well, I suppose the challenge you've got is those redundancies they're looking to avoid. Are they going to happen anyway? We don't know at this point, do we?
Yeah. I mean, if you took the normal, let's just take, you know, a social club that's been literally shut down and not been able to operate. You know, you would think, you know, people are gagging to get back in this social club. You would think as soon as the opportunity is there, it's going to get back to how it was in terms of the, you know, being able to and needing to employ these people. You know, maybe some other industries, and you know, I've got another business that offers office space. Will that go back to normality? I don't think so, unfortunately. You know.
Yeah, I mean, are we going to carry on working the way we worked before? I don't think we will. I mean, it will be a hybrid, I think, but it will look differently. So it's interesting. Yeah. Thanks, Janet. Appreciate that. James, talk to me about you, your business. Introduce yourself to everybody and tell us a bit about what's going on in your world.
Hello, everyone. James Scurfield here. The company's called Scurfield and Associates. We solely specialise in wills and estate planning. So that might be from, you know, a young family with young children legally appointing guardians up to clients with multiple properties all around the world protecting their wealth. So during this third lockdown, we've seen a huge increase in general kind of wills and estate planning. I think that's because people they have more time at home and can gather information, can have those type of conversations. And I keep hearing that the numbers now are becoming more names, where it's getting a lot closer to home with people sadly losing loved ones through COVID. It's all getting a lot more real. And like you said, Chris, I think this is the norm at the moment, isn't it? This is the way of working. Me heading into the city to have a meeting seems a bit of a luxury now. But yeah, so.
Well, I'm looking forward to the time I can actually have a lunch out. That'd be nice.
Yeah, I know. It'd be nice.
I mean, I think one of the things that we as professionals have got an obligation to do is guide our clients through what could be a potentially pretty tough time at the moment.
Yeah.
And certainly we've had 2 cases where we've been involved with the probate process because we've had clients who have passed. And we're helping the families do that. And I think giving the clients reassurance that we are there to help is super important at the minute.
Yeah, that's worth it. That's worth its weight in gold. You know, it's the little things that we do behind the scenes that we don't charge per hour or per letter or anything like that. It's those little things. And the general public, especially when someone dies, really don't know what to do. And that's why working with people like yourselves is always good, because you can offer the financial advice and then pass that wealth.
I mean, sometimes when we'll talk about this as part of the case study, it's the simple stuff. Like between the meeting that I saw Ian and Janet at this morning and this meeting, I had one of my client review meetings, and it was a client who started to work with last year, who still hadn't told us what beneficiaries they wanted to nominate on their pension. And part of our process is say, look, we need to get this done. It's a free form. It's super simple, but telling the pension trustees who you want that money to go to is something we need done.
Yeah.
Because we do that annual review process, it's a good reminder for them to go, you know what, I do need to do that. And we're going to support them to do that. So thanks, James.
What about the things like the death in service? Imagine you've been working for a company for the last 8 years and you've appointed an ex-girlfriend.
Yeah,
that you haven't changed. You haven't simply filled in a form or changed it. That's
keeping them updated is and they're the sort of things, and we'll talk about it as part of the case study. But life cover that isn't assigned appropriately, that's a big one for us. Making sure that's done is super important.
Yeah.
Thanks, James. Appreciate that, and I look forward to chat soon. Raymond, talk to me about you, your business. Introduce yourself to everybody, and tell us what's going on in your world.
Yeah, Raymond Holt, Ignentis Partners. So I work with small business owners to build their businesses with their families. So primary working with business owners so that they can communicate what's happening in their businesses with their partners.
Does that include getting your wife to pay for her own Valentine's flowers, Raymond, or not?
I did actually ask my wife to buy it when she went shopping, and I got the kind of wrong end of the very sharp stick.
Yes, so did I when I sent that email. So did I. But yeah.
So, and so a lot of I work with businesses that are sort of 25 people and less in terms of size, because typically businesses that want to be small and beautiful rather than large and ugly, and therefore are looking to really connect what they want personally with what the business is able to deliver.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before. You know, that aspiration of linking your business to your life is key, isn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose the thing that's going on right now is it's a real, pretty much a lot of my clients have restructured through furlough, have really and actually have engaged their partners and brought them a little closer to the business in a way that their partners can cope with right now.
Yeah.
So so that they can actually talk about whether they took funding, what the aims of the funding was to take, what the longer term position looks like, and what the challenges are in the short term. So it's been so as a finance director and a coach, I get to use both sides of those skills. So but it's as rewarding as it is challenging.
Thank you. Thanks, Raymond. I lost you for a second there, but yeah, rewarding and challenging. I think you were saying. So we'll come back to you and talk a little bit about a case study a bit later on. Paul, can you tell everybody a little bit about you, your business, and what life is like for you at the minute?
Sure. Hi. Thanks. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, my name is Paul Valsden. My company is Corporate Counsel. So I help business owners who want to expand, grow, not always to an exit, but very often there is an exit in mind. Because I think accountants often tell you when you start a business, you think about how you're going to finish it. It's a good adage. So I work with SMEs all around the country, at the moment, also overseas. I've got a client in the States. I'm helping them with raising finance for investment into their company. I also do that with a number of tech companies. So I originally come from a communications, PR and communications background. So I also still have a few clients who ask me to do that. I'm doing some work for a big company at the moment on that, so that sort of keeps my hand in there. But it's mainly about helping business owners to grow. But I don't really describe myself as a coach. Ideally, I would actually go in and actually act as an interim and help them to actually get the job done, and you know, rather than actually just tell them what to do. And that's a little bit more difficult with COVID, but you know, you can still obviously be as practical as possible.
And those different approaches are interesting, isn't it? You know, empower somebody with the tools to do it, or actually actively support them, and that would be different, different business owners, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
How so we've just taken on a new private client who's in the PR and comp space, and I'll talk to you about that, Paul, because there might be a good connection for you there.
Thank you.
How have those skills you learned in PR and comms relate to what you do now?
I think it's interesting you asked that, because a lot of people I think a lot of it's around understanding about briefs. So one of the things about communications and PR and being a journalist, I've done all that as well, is you've got to actually know how to listen, how to get to something very quickly. And during my interim career, I did a lot of work in government where you know, you have to get in the depth of something and understand a new bill. You know, it's sort of like you've got 2 hours to sort of digest it all and put it all down into 5 key points. So it's that sort of skill I think you bring to actually distilling problems and then saying, right, where do you want to go to? And I think also, particularly when you're exiting or people are exiting their business or being taken over, communications is vital. I mean, so many mergers and acquisitions don't work because the cultures don't fit, and that's down to bad communication. So so it's an interesting one. So, but how I got into business consultancy, because I had my own company with a business partner for 10 years. And I sold my shares to them. And while I was doing my comms sort of interim stuff, somebody said, "Oh, you run your own business. Can you sort out that little problem for us over there?" So that's how it started.
Okay, amazing, great, and thanks for joining us today. It's appreciated.
Thank you.
Sharon, how are you? Oh, you're on mute. First time today.
Are you collecting cows?
I am. I don't think my financial plan's going to be based on the amount of times that I can say you're on mute, though.
No.
But I hope not. Anyway.
And usually think you get rich quick scheme.
Exactly. You know what? One of my frustrations at the minute is the prevalence of financial scams that I'm seeing on the internet. And I wrote a blog about it the other day. My youngest daughter is obsessed with TikTok at the minute, which if you've got kids, you probably know about. And there's some really bad, poor advice going on social media at the minute, particularly on platforms like that. I mean, I use it just to do some really bad dad dancing with my kids. I mean, that's the only thing I do, but certainly, yeah, I won't get financial advice from it. Certainly not. Sharon, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. That's the same as my story about the man in the pub. The man in the pub who is so great with his free advice, if his advice was so fantastic, wouldn't be standing in the pub giving you free advice.
No.
He'd have migrated to the Bahamas and be sunning himself on a beach somewhere, wouldn't he?
And that's I mean, for us as a professional, investing and speculating is two different things, right? And one of the interesting things is the amount of people who particularly in sort of more niche areas like foreign exchange and commodities and stuff like that, that's not investing. It doesn't follow investing principles. It's speculation. And it's always weird that you've got these businesses that sell courses in how to do it. Well, why are you not just doing it as opposed to selling the course in it? That never makes sense to me. Anyway, I'll let you tell us about you and your business.
So, start that again, shall we? I'm Sharon from Argos Accounting. I set up Argos in May last year out of sheer frustration with traditional accountancy firms, and I'm sure Janet will bear this out, where you're trying to account for every 6 minutes and you're trying to make sure that you invoice somebody, anybody, a client, any client, doesn't matter which client, for every 6 minutes of your time, which is just, it's an archaic way to work now. So I've ditched the timesheets and I go with value pricing, menu pricing. So I select with my clients the services they need at the time that has the potential to grow as they grow. We can add on, we can adjust things as we need to. It's not cast in stone forever. And it's something to work with them to bring their businesses to the front and really make their businesses what they dreamed it would be. So it's a different approach. It's a novel approach. And it's one I really like because it gives me the opportunity to work with my clients the way I want to work with them without having to worry about my 6 minutes and without having to worry if I spend £50 investing in 300 clients or that I could have a soft impact on their businesses with. So it's just completely different.
Do you think do you think the larger practices are sort of changing their perspective on the way they do things, or do you think that sort of the big accounting firms are still tied to that sort of rigorous time costing as opposed to the value add stuff that you do?
I think they say that they're changing it, but in honesty, I've been 20 odd years working in different practices. For all of that time, accountancy's been evolving and more digital technology has come in and we're going to provide a better service and we're going to do things differently. But in reality, for your traditional firms, really not much has changed. They give it lip service and they all talk about this business advisory, but when you actually ask them what they do about business advisory or what they do to make them proactive accountants, they haven't got much in their toolbox to give you any ammunition as to what they're doing.
Yeah, and that, I suppose the other challenge you've got is that relationship, isn't it? You know, with bigger firms and people moving around, do you maintain a longer term relationship with a particular individual? Well, you might do, but you might not. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Okay.
The loss for them has been part of my journey, where from each firm I have left, I've effectively taken clients with me because I've been the one they've had a relationship with. So that's where they're doing it a bit wrong, because they haven't got relationships with their clients that they really need to have.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sharon. I really appreciate you telling us a little bit about that. Ian Wainstall's popped out for a minute. I think his web connection's a little bit low. So let's take a look at the case study. So just want to highlight some of the pertinent points before we sort of dig a bit deeper in it. As always, there is a 80s theme, and it's just, I can't, with Google, it's not easy to just hide these things in a case study. So it's probably super apparent. No prize for guessing what the 80s theme is, but apart from the satisfaction of knowing you got it right. So Danny runs a motor sales business, G-Army Cars, for the past 10 years with his wife, Mandy. Business is now theirs, although it was originally Mr. Gowdy's, who's currently a minority shareholder. Life and business has been good for Mandy and Danny over the past few years. They've got 3 sites across Essex, employing 30, but lockdown has hit them because they're not considered an essential service, but they are doing a click and collect online team. But the challenge they've had is they've always been a bricks and mortar business. So during lockdown, that's had an impact because their web presence hasn't been as open. And he needs to consider about the nature of how his business might change in the future. And certainly we've got enough experience and expertise in the room to examine that. He also wants to make sure that his business, when it comes back, is complying with all the relevant regulation and maintaining higher standards, particularly due to COVID. So what else does he need to consider based on COVID? Danny and Mandy have got 2 kids aged 4 and 5. They've got a mortgage of £200 on a repayment basis with a remaining term of 10 years. Danny's got a will completed 10 years ago. Mandy hasn't. They've never considered powers of attorney, but they've been speaking to some friends who run businesses who said you really should think about this. Danny owns a rental property, but this has proved to be less profitable in the last year. And they lost their tenants during COVID and have struggled to find a tenant at that same rate. Funny enough, a lot of the stuff that I put in case studies is based on the work we do with actual clients. And we had a client go through that experience recently, which was interesting. Monthly net profit is 225, and they've got equity in there of about 125 grand. Mr. G-Army retired a few years ago, maintained shares in the business, and he gets an income from those shares. He relinquished control 2 years ago, but is finding himself struggling to find what to do with his time. He's clearly not good at retirement. Danny's neighbour is a guy called John Shriek, also currently looking at his options. Recently sold his business for 1.4 million, expecting to benefit from entrepreneur relief, but the amount that he expected is now less. He's wondering what to do to mitigate the capital gains tax bill, and he's concerned that his estate is currently worth a decent amount, 2.7 million. So he's got some IHT issues that he needs to consider. So question 1, and the place we always start. Let me just put this little disclaimer on there. All mistakes are intentional. I've done it on purpose, right? I've done it on purpose to make sure that we're all keeping aware. Of course I have. But what questions would you ask, and what extra clarification would you want from any of the people mentioned in the case study? We're going to start off with Ian.
Right, okay. Yeah, so this is one of the few 80s references I got. I just couldn't figure out exactly how you did it, but your anagram skills are going to have to get better, Chris. That's all I can say.
I know. I used an online anagram tool to help me as well, Ian, and it didn't, because trying to anagram Miyagi is not the easiest thing in the world.
No. I am glad you didn't use a wax on, wax off metaphor, though. Right, so I'm going to concentrate on Danny and Mandy, and that they're the 2 people that I would put most of my questions to. and it will be talking to Danny in the most part, and understand why he wants to be in the car business. The why is the driver for pretty much everything we do in our businesses. And get to talk with him and maybe Mr. Guilherme to find out what the plan was before COVID hit. And then it's okay, what do you see now? How can you transform where you've come from into where you want it to be, and work on that new plan? I would challenge perhaps the need for redundancy into job training and changes people's functions. That might be a better way of going. And also it's got 3 sites. Well, are they owned? Are they rented? Or at least what are the arrangements? Because again, there could be options about doing that. And he also may need quite a lot of individual support. Being a good employee and being a good business owner are 2 completely different kettles of fish. So, where does he think he's lacking? What is it that Mr. Guilherme has done that he just doesn't get? And talk to him through all of those kinds of things to see where the immediate help can come from.
I suppose the interesting thing is sometimes like leadership for business is tested when times are the most volatile, aren't they? So he might not have experienced some of these challenges before, but now he is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you've actually aged the children really young, so they're kind of out of the picture for the immediate plans. But if there is a developing desire for a long-term plan to stay in the business, the children can kind of come back into the game plan. But yeah, I mean, the other thing that would be really good to know for his business would to understand what they've had the business valued at, because again, there will be some key markers in that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the family business particulars with Raymond, because there might be some insight into that. Certainly when I look at my business, the age my kids are, it's difficult to know at this point whether they'll ever want to take it on. So how do you sort of square that circle if your kids are young? Janet, talk to me. Thanks, Ian, appreciate that. Janet, talk to me about the questions you'd ask.
Excuse me. There's quite a few numbers I felt were missing for me. So to make sort of give good advice and make decisions. So I think just to start off with was the rental property. Knowing what numbers are involved there, what would the capital gain on that be if we disposed of it, if we brought it into the limited company, what figures are we talking about there? What was the outstanding sort of mortgage on that? And then the other one was the sort of car business. We've got no indication on what the overheads are on that. So to sort of make a decision about whether to scale that back and take it more online, via an app or something like that. If we could look at what the overheads were, you could make a decision on that and maybe sort of change that whole model in respect to that. And then the other thing that was sort of missing for me was John. I wasn't really sure what his business was and whether or not that was transferable into their business, and then the whole sort of question behind using rollover relief for the business that he's sold, whether or not it is transferable over and whether the relief would apply. So
well, it would potentially, wouldn't it, on any CGT, using the right vehicles?
Yeah, if it's got to be moving the same sort of business or using his skills in the new business, I think so. That was the thing. I didn't really know what he did.
I mean, when I put in the case study, I looked at it from a different perspective. So I looked at it from potentially using EIS and VCT as an option, because they then allow you to use holdover relief from an investment perspective and allow him not to worry about spending his time working in another business and benefit from holdover relief. The challenge we've got is those sort of investments come with a slightly increased level of risk that he'd need to be comfortable with. What other questions did you have?
You know, it was mainly on knowing a bit more about the sort of business structure that you've got there. So really knowing, you know, what the business, the car business is. We've not seen a balance sheet on that, or so to really know what is their position as far as their assets and their liabilities. So I think they were my main questions really.
Assets and liabilities. Yeah, cool. Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Janet, just a quick understanding of where you're going with potentially putting the property into the limited company. Is there, I mean, number one, you've got the CGT gain that you'd need to consider. But would there be an element that you'd have to be careful of in terms of combining rental property with another trade?
Well, you can have multiple trades within a company. It's not no problem with doing that. You may need to change what the SIP codes are and stuff like that, and change, but no problem bringing that investment into the business. I think for me,
50% though, isn't it? Actively traded company.
Yeah. So I think, and also you've got to bear in mind, you've got other people that have got part shares in that company, so you're bringing in an asset that is all yours, and
it's mine.
So I think there was a few things. I'm not sure whether or not that would be the best thing to do on that. I
mean, my element is that overexposure in the investment company, because I mean, one property probably wouldn't make any difference, but if he used it as a shell for all properties, then it'd be an investment company and wouldn't work as well.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Okay.
So the only advantage, at the moment, the only advantages for bringing properties into live is the mortgage interest relief that you're going to get 100%, as opposed to the restrictions that are going through personally at the moment. So that's the trade-off, if you like. You've got to do that calculation to see what's most beneficial.
And it's one of the reasons I included it, because if they are higher rate taxpayers, they'll lose the benefit of taking the mortgage relief. And potentially there's a conversation to be had around what's going to happen when Rishi gets his pen out to CGT. Because that might change.
I've got a bad feeling about this. I have got, because hasn't he said there's certain taxes he won't change, and that's not one of them.
Well, I think he's highlighted corporation tax as not changeable, because he wants businesses to continue to grow. But CGT, I think, is on the cards, and an equalisation of CGT, if he keeps the 8%. Sorry for digging in the weeds, everybody, but if he keeps that 8%, you could be looking at 48% on residential property gains, couldn't you?
No, I really hammered it. I did a calculation the other week, and you could sort of, compared to what you could have sold when you was getting your full relief on that rental property, you've got lettings allowance potentially, you had your PPR relief. People are losing all of that. It's really hammering them now. So it's
you know what, and I don't think it's a new thing that they've tried to disincentivize investment in rental property. No. It's happened over a few years, but it's interesting. Thanks, Janet. We'll come back to you. We have got the tendency, I know I'll phone you every now and again and go, look, I've got this really techie thing, and then we have a geeky email thread where we just talk dig in the weeds a bit, which is, some of it's good, but we'll try and dig in the weeds a bit later on, but make it also a bit broader. Thank you. James, tell me what your questions were for the individuals in the case study.
Okay, so my first question, wearing my wills and estate planning hat, would be that Mr. had a will 10 years ago. Look to update that, and the most important thing would be to legally appoint guardians for children under 18. So it'd be,
You know what's interesting? Our will that we rewrote probably about 5 years ago now, Cassie and
Yeah.
I. The hardest part of getting that will done was working out who would look after Charlotte and Sophie. You know, the money was easy, but who would look after Charlotte and Sophie is difficult. And how do you help people make sure that they're in a position where they get that right?
By asking questions like, you know, first of all, you know, who would you trust with your children? Do they have children themselves? Is the house big enough? Would they have to move? Logistics, like there's no point appointing, you know, the elder brother who lives in a penthouse, a property in London, who's got no interest in children. It's not going to be right for the kids. Having those conversations. We can also appoint reserve guardians, because we normally find, you know, the couple are discussing amongst themselves who's going to appoint. Well, you can appoint reserve, so if anything was to happen, worst case scenario, to the guardians that you appoint, you can bring on the reserve guardians. We also, as a company as well, discuss and make sure that the guardians, the executors, trustees and certificate providers, they all understand their roles and responsibilities, and there's ongoing support, because especially for an executor, you know, half the population probably really don't know what to do and the clever ways of protecting things. So my first point would be addressing the wills. Powers of attorney are vitally important. They're the documents while you're alive to legally look after your property and your finance and your health and welfare. You can also get business powers of attorney. So you can have, let's say, for example, in my business, I appointed you, Chris, as my property and finance for my business, but for my personal stuff, I had my wife or girlfriend or whoever.
James, just one area of clarification on that. Let's say, for example, I had a client who ran their business with 2 or 3 different directors, but their personal finances were running the house, and the partner wasn't, you know, involved in the business directly. Appointment of on a business power of attorney, because you limit that to financial decisions about a limited company.
Correct, that's right. Yeah, you're right that you just simply add that into, well, not simply, but you add that into the clauses of the document.
Yeah, cool.
Just to make everyone aware, it's currently taking 4 months to register the documents, which is pretty horrific, really. And that's planning ahead. Imagine if a family haven't planned ahead. And it's important as well, if you're dealing, Chris, and the other people are dealing with these clients and they do lose capacity, you want to be able to still assist and guide the family. We can also put things like the business clauses in the wills and set up business trusts to keep them outside the estate in the future. I'd be personally chatting with accountants to see how the accounts are being managed and looking at share option schemes. We can help with cross option agreements as well. And you guys can put the relevant insurance policies in place to pay out. I'd also be addressing and asking things like key man insurance. You know, the dynamics of the business, who's actually doing the business day to day, and really opening up the meaningful conversations. Are any of their parents still around? Are they going to be inheriting assets? Is that going to cause their estate to be even larger and then give them an even bigger inheritance tax issue? Maybe talk about skipping generations and setting up via yourselves, you know, junior ISAs for grandchildren. Start investing and creating wealth for them. The neighbour's got a huge inheritance tax issue, and anything over 2 million is going to lose £1 of every 2 of the residents' nil rate band. So we could look to set up things like settler excluded trusts, where we move a percentage of the main property into trust now for the benefit of the children. That's part of section 21 of the Inheritance Act. Gifting as well. What else? That's pretty much about it at the moment. I would introduce them to mortgage brokers to see what mortgage rate they're getting. As well.
We'll come back round when we've a bit further. But the interesting point you raised, and actually when you get a copy of the webinar, you'll see this, James. We spoke about that on the webinar I ran yesterday. The amount of business owners we work with who haven't got the capital in the event of death in their business to make sure that they can buy the shares back from their spouse. So they've got no cash in the business to do that, and no wills, so that we know where the shares are going, and no cross option agreement it's more than you'd think, and it's scary, because then it just becomes an absolute mess when it comes to who owns the shares and who's going to continue to run the business.
Because the conversation with the business is a completely different conversation, as it's all together and all linked. But for example, how's the business? The accountant will be Sharon will be able to help. But how's the business valued? What assets does it hold? Is there any options for business property relief?
Yep.
You know, and so on. So
I mean, we had one. We did some work for a recruitment firm at the minute, looking at their key people and their shareholder protection. The challenge is their turnover's gone up by about £800,000 over the last 3 years. So the plans they put in place day one are now sort of irrelevant, because the business value is fundamentally different. Yeah. So, you know, how often do you review this stuff is key as well, isn't it? You know, that guy who's got a 10-year-old will, you know, is it? Well,
that's a question. Why isn't that will company contacting them every year, even if it's a 10-minute update that nothing's changed? You know, the amount of families I see when we do a review, they forget the company and they don't even remember the guy or the girl that did the will for them. And that just doesn't sit well with me. So, because sadly, you know, we lose people, you know, quicker than we expect. So it's important we all keep on top of things, and it's important that our little network, we all liaise with each other on every client. We're not stepping on anyone's toes, but we're all like, right, from the estate planning point of view, this is what we're doing. From your point of view, from Sharon's point of view, Janet, Ian, you know.
And the people in the room know that I'm key in that collaboration. You know, I always want to be working together, and I'm
it makes it,
sure Sharon and Janet keep phoning them up and working together and collaborating. I mean, you can say no. You know what I mean? You cannot work with me if you guys want. Thanks, James. Appreciate that.
Pleasure.
Paul, talk to me about what your thoughts were.
Oh, I'm off mute now. Right. You asked a question. So a couple of questions I have. What's the mark that the car dealership is selling? And given where we are at the moment, of course, that's quite important. You know, with electric cars becoming the normal, hybrids and so forth. You know, and they seem to be a little bit stuck back in the old days of you know, guys in very wide suits selling cars off the forecourt. So it would be good to understand that and think about what the long-term plans might be. And it may be, if they've got a good mark or brand, they will get some help in repositioning their business. I think also looking at the other players you put in there, and I assume they're not there as red herrings, so they're meant to be getting on. I think the question you'd have to ask is, do they all get on? Because it's great thinking about going into business with people, but especially you know, some of them they're much longer, have had different lives. So I think it would be a good question to ask everyone. And without going into what I would then do, I'd probably, I suppose, get them all together around a table. And I've done this a lot with people, you know, to try to sort of see, look, where are the common grounds and what does everybody want? So yeah, and also, of course, the neighbour obviously has quite a lot of wealth, and if it was handled right, it could actually be very helpful for the business. And yes, obviously back to the personal thing, and obviously that's where you would help them. I mean, I'm sure that there's probably better ways they could protect their rental income. You know, you can get insurance for that sort of thing, or if you want to, you go to local authorities, providing you trust the tenants, but you know, you've got a guaranteed income if that's their concern, you know, those sorts of things. So those are the questions I would ask before we come up to these solutions.
But I think you make an interesting point, because that personal aspiration and that professional aspiration, if you've got people from it's an interesting one, isn't it? We've got clients who are part of family businesses where their personal values and goals might be aligned, and then you've got businesses that are a bit more diverse, and where you might have three directors all with all their own motivations.
That's
right. Did some work at the minute about with a young guy who's a director of a business who the older guy wants to stop and is selling it to the employer ownership trust.
Right. Interesting. again, it's managing, age, your ambitions and your goals will be very different if you're 30 to if you're 60, but yeah, interesting.
Good, thanks, Paul. We'll come back to you with your comments in terms of what you might recommend in a little while. Sharon, talk to me a little bit about what your thoughts were and what extra questions you'd want to ask.
Okay, so I concentrated really on Danny and Mandy, and what I'd really like to know is what financials they have on their business. So a bit, as Janet said, what are their overheads? What is it costing them to run these three? Would it be cost effective for them to say, actually, do they own the sites? Are they renting the sites? Are they currently having to pay rent? Or is it a case of they're just paying mortgage? Would it be cost effective to sell one and combine into the other two, which may mean they don't need to lose staff? What have their staff been doing while they're furloughed? Have some of the staff gone off and done something slightly different while they've been furloughed? Would they be open to coming back part-time? Are there any natural losses in the staff? Are there any that are looking at retirement anyway and might welcome that opportunity? So redundancy there, but obviously you're going to have to factor in redundancy costs. And looking then at their figures, then they've got a loss at the moment. What does it take? Let's do a forecast. What does it take for them to recover from that loss? Where do we go? Are they selling new or used cars? Are they holding a lot of assets? Is there a lot of stock, or is it something that they buy as they sell? It's what's their base? So there's those questions on those guys. What was the other one? Yeah, there's not. I did some digging to see what sort of grants maybe or finance may be available, but apart from furlough for that industry, there doesn't seem to be a great deal, and I don't think that's going to change, to be honest.
I mean, Paul raised an interesting point though, because you've got and again, it's one of those things that we've talked about earlier on before we start recording this call. You've got those short-term sticking plasters, and then you've got the longer-term trends that potentially have an impact. And in the car industry, Paul's right. EV, electric vehicles are huge at the minute. I mean, we're looking at an EV at the minute, and if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I get an electric car? I said, well, look, the image of them has changed over the years, and actually particularly if you live on the borders of London, they're a bit more practical, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Not great for that drive to Scotland yet, but we'll get there on that. Thanks, Sharon, and we'll come back to you.
If you're stuck with a load of second-hand cars that aren't going to be adaptable, then his losses could be even higher because he's not going to shift them. So
I mean, it's interesting because we don't know enough to say whether the reliance on that old school business model that's worked for years might be different in this world, and whether they've adapted to change quick enough. Thanks, Sharon. Appreciate that. Raymond, talk to me about your thoughts and what questions you'd want to ask.
Well, I was going to say, as an ex-motor industry man, I was reading this. So just a couple of extra bits on the business. In terms of understanding the current model, good motor businesses actually make their money on finance number plates and park and distribute and how they service vehicles. Right, okay. So what you can't tell from here is whether they've got the infrastructure or the park to be able to make that kind of change in their business. So when saying earlier about transferring the people from sales to after sales, that's a natural that is a natural movement in the industry anyway. I was really interested to understand what the shareholding was, so why he might run the business. I wonder if whether he owns the business in terms of whether he's the primary owner. Yeah. But also it says that Mr. Giammi is a minority shareholder. It'd be interesting to understand what minority means.
Yeah, because that could be anywhere from 1 to 49, couldn't it?
Yes, and that has massive implications. It doesn't say very much about their own personal circumstances and therefore the connectivity between their personal circumstances and the business. It doesn't say whether they're sufficiently taking out of the business what they need and what the implications of anything that any changes would have on them. The one James was talking about earlier, for me, the one I had here was about what kind of insurance do they have and protection around family, because my experience as well is that business owners don't protect their family. They think about the business and completely forget about
100%.
the fact that what happens if they're not there, because we don't think because we're supermen and we don't think we're not going to be. On Mr. Giami, I was kind of a bit like, what is he getting out of the motor business that's, if it isn't there in terms of dividends, going to put his lifestyle at risk? And what is his lifestyle and what assets does he have? He's retired, but does that mean he's not drawing a pension or anything like that at the moment? Is it because that kind of retired in inverted commas was kind of a bit interesting. And I think, there's everything else was quite a lot of what everybody else had already said. I was just really interested to understand the underlying business and what it actually means to change, and then the implications on themselves of making those changes.
So there might be a really good insight here, Raymond, because when I write these case studies, I haven't got an insight into the mechanics of how a car business might work. So what, in terms of profitability, is it all sort of the majority of it back end, like servicing, finance?
It is, but most motor businesses think about, motor businesses think about selling the car and how much money they can make on the car, when actually you can make more money on the life of the car rather than on the car. So most auto dealers make very low margins. The other thing, which I think was Sharon was saying, most auto dealers own the property, and that's how they get their value, is that they make a small return on the business, but they actually get
on the land.
On the land, yes.
Gotcha.
So the more you understand what's happening, the more you can understand, well, making a change in the business. But if they own the land anyway, it might be about replacing one income for another. But
that's the interesting thing, isn't it? In all of our businesses and all of the clients we work with, that lifetime value of a client conversation is different to the transactional value. And I think we're now in a world where relationships everything, isn't it? How do you make sure that you're doing that? And I agree with your point about the Superman syndrome of business owners. Do we look at what can go wrong and what do we need to do to fix that? Cassie will probably tell you that I'm guilty of that as well, though, Raymond. So that's the problem.
Car companies also, they like to do the finance. They do, the PCP option, where it's a bit like a mobile phone. So a mobile phone, after your 2-year contract, you're likely to just continue with the same provider and upgrade to the new phone. And that's what the car industry tries to do with the financing. They get to that optimum point when they've got roughly a year left, and then they cash in for the similar deposit, and it just recycles and goes again. But like Raymond said, they make most of their money on the servicing
relationship.
And they try and sell roughly. The reason I know this, I worked at Stansted Audi as a car salesman for 8 months. Audi approved, so I can sell Audis anywhere in the world. But if you get to know me, I'm not a car salesman. If you come into the showroom and I drive you around, I used to get told off. Can you believe this? I used to get told off on a Saturday for taking a family for a test drive for more than 10 minutes. How can you take someone for a test drive in 10 minutes when they're spending 70,000, 80,000 pounds? And if they want to think about it, of course I'm going to let them think about it. I'm not going to say, oh, if you leave today, you're not going to get a better deal. So,
but it's interesting, isn't it? Because that changing culture, I did at the start of my career, I had a failed year in recruitment, and the reason being is because the relationship in recruitment is you are a salesperson as opposed to investing in the longer term relationships that I always enjoyed. And I think you pick your profession based on what you've enjoyed doing, and for me it's all about the relationship, and that doesn't come with sales pressure.
Well, I do remember the manager said, because they had to get rid of staff, and I was last in, first out, and out of 11 I was about sixth or seventh best, which is not bad, never selling cars. Anyway, he called me to one side and said, we're gonna have to get rid of you. And I said, you know what, you've just spent £4,500 getting me Audi approved. He did say, though, you should work for Lamborghini. And I said, why? And he said, because you only need to sell 1 or 2 a month. And he said, the time you spend and get to know people, that would be perfect for you. Whereas really, although I love the brand Audi, there's the Audi way And then there's I own a car showroom, sell as many cars as possible and get, you know, and that's just not me. So I think I'm definitely in the right industry in terms of building relationships with people. And
but when it comes to the case study, that raises an interesting point. You know, if they're a old school bricks and mortar business and they've done well out of that, is there a mindset shift that they need to make in the more relationship focused economy we live in today?
Yeah, definitely.
Don't know. I mean, I think the reality is that none of us are anonymous anymore, are we? You know, we're all in a position where our reputations, I mean, certainly the way that I see it, our reputations are far more valuable than any particular client we acquire. You know, that's where the value lies. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Thanks for raising it, James. Appreciate that.
That's right.
Ian, you're sitting in front of this client. They're worried about coming back to work in this potentially more compliance focused world we live in, particularly with health and safety regulation. How do we make sure that they can come back in a way that works for them, their business, so it doesn't put too much pressure on them, and still make a profit?
No pressure then.
I'm not asking much, mate.
No, I mean there is that big 5-letter word starting with P that you hate, Chris. Pivot.
Yes, pivot.
Pivot. Raymond alluded to it as well. You know, they've talked. Janet and Sharon alluded to it in terms of, you know, what is the shape of the business to come. Do you have one site as your showroom? Do you convert one site into a service centre? Do you need the third site? All of these things come to the fore, and whatever you do, you are therefore in a lot greater control of the purpose of each site. You can make sure that your process is tight, that the people that manage those sites know exactly what they're doing, and you know that then you've got the investment from the sold site is then to build your app. You know, this is your new car app. Can they do or build a VR version of a test drive? All of these kind of things are probably going to come in the not too distant future, and this is the kind of thing that is open to Danny and what's his wife's name, Mandy? Yeah,
Amanda.
So you know that there can be some big opportunities here, and if Danny was short on cash, if there was not enough cash in the business, that you couldn't release enough cash from getting rid of a site because that particular one was rented and not owned, then you kind of go knocking on John's door and say, oh, by the way, how'd you fancy doing a development loan? You know, and this is where knowing your surroundings and knowing what's around you really works. Having a, you know, it's what we all know. You know, we need to use our connections, and you've said it before today, Chris. You know, we need to collaborate. So it's working all of those angles and making sure that they can move forward. It will probably also enable the retraining. I think Sharon said it part-time. You can bring in job sharing. It all comes into the fore then about potential ways to move forwards. Take a lot out of the cost side and to really build the bottom line.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing as well is to do a bit of a, Janet and Sharon will probably have a perspective on this, just looking at the profitability of each site and seeing whether there's, you know, one that's particularly, you know, successful and one's not been. Janet, what are your recommendations, you think? What would you reckon they should be doing?
I mean, it's quite interesting because I do have a few businesses in the motor industry, so I couldn't help sort of calling on them. And one in particular that I started working with, they literally from scratch 5 years ago, and they were one of my first clients. And we met up in a coffee shop, and two directors, one of the directors' wives, and we sat around and talked about where they were going. And so they was working from a cabin in their back garden, and are still working from a cabin in their back garden. And their results last year, they turned over 11 million from a cabin in their back garden. You know, making good profits, minimal overheads. You know, literally, it can be done. You know, and they just work on the basis of the relationships they've got with ongoing customers. That they, you know, get repeat work. They, you know, they supply fleet vehicles, and you know, all them things that, I mean, they hire a prestigious office space should they need to hold a client meeting, but it's minimal cost really, what they're actually doing. So that, you know, they're doing amazing. And another garage that's moving into like specialising in the electric vehicles, like you say, you know, you've got to adapt your business to what's you know, what's out there. And you know, I think generally that's the advice I would be giving to them. You know, do you need these flashy showrooms anymore? You know,
well, the world's changed, hasn't it? I mean, if we need to, you know, the perception of success now is different to what it might have been a long while ago.
I mean, the new thing on the block is the zip cars, isn't it? Where you, you know,
sharing.
Rent your car by the hour or whatever it is, you know. And you know, who would have thought that was a thing? But I know some business owners which are actually using that now because they're saying it, you know, it works for them. They can, you know, a zip van for the day is all they need. They don't need to have that full-time van. And with all the sort of lack of parking and everything in town centres, it's actually working for them. So yeah, I think, you know, hugely you've got to look at all that now.
Well, you know what, Jenny? I look at like the decisions I make with my own life, and you go, look, I don't need a car sat outside my house all the time because I might not need it. We need it for the kids, so we've got a car. But we used to have 2 cars, one of which sat outside the house for the majority of the time, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't need to. And then I suppose the other thing is, and again, it's something that we as a practice we're working on at the minute, is people focusing more on their values, and particularly in our world, how they invest. So is the way we live our lives, in like sort of, are we making changes in our lives? And not all of us, because some of us are not driven by this, but aligned to what we believe, including investing. And I think you're seeing people change their lifestyles a bit because of some of that. Like, you know, EV is an example, isn't it? You know, how do I have a more positive impact on the world?
Yeah, hugely. Yeah, so, you know, I think for me, that would be the things I'd be concentrating on, looking at that whole sort of business model and, you know, is it viable anymore? Or, you know.
So let me ask you a question then. How do you separate the ego of having this superficially impressive looking business with the commercial reality of saying, you know, this could be more efficient?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. It's, you know, I think a business owner, you know, when they build their business, it's so personal. You know, they put their heart and soul into it. You know, they build it. You know, I always see 2 types of business people: those that start their business with a view to selling it. So it's really, you know, an investment for them, and there's no real attachment there. But you know, with this type of business, it's grown with them, and it's going to be very personal to them. And so to separate that and say and suggest that would be, I think, is something we would have to deal with quite sensitively, and sort of show the advantages, maybe showing a nicer way of life that could be achieved from not having these huge overheads draining the business away. And like you say, if you can align that with the, you know, this sort of nice effect of, you know, you're doing good to the world, you know, you're saving energy, you're doing all these good things, you know, then it sort of enhances and softens the, you know, the potential change effect.
But also, what sort of life could you have if you focused on making the business work for you as opposed to you working for the business?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, appreciate that. James, what are you, you're sitting down in front of these guys, what are you thinking about recommending?
For me, from what I said before?
yeah, was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of specific recommendations and thoughts?
Oh, so I would be doing their full estate planning. I would be doing the powers of attorney, looking at how the main residence is set up, look to do some kind of ongoing lifetime planning with the main residents, making sure that they legally appoint guardians in the will, checking to see if they have any elderly parents still where they might be inheriting assets. I would be arranging meetings with them to discuss to make sure that that's ring-fenced and protected. And like everyone said today, discussing and finding out what they're looking to achieve now and in the future with regards to the business, making sure the relevant kind of business protections in place, shareholder cross-option agreements. And
so one question I had on that, mate. So two elements. So the potentially looking at putting the property into trust, which was one of the things you mentioned earlier. How do you mitigate the potential gift with reservation issues that might create?
Well, it'd be settler excluded.
Right.
So the settler won't be benefiting from that share of that property.
Gotcha.
They'd have to live 7 years.
Yeah.
And then it would fall out. So it'd move from a CLT to a PET, potentially exempt transfer.
Yeah, but you exclude the settler as a beneficiary. Correct. And therefore there's no benefit for the person gifting the money, is there?
That's right. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, well that makes perfect sense. Thanks, James. Appreciate that.
No, that's okay.
Sharon, talk to me about what you'd be recommending.
Unmute. Okay, definitely to get a better handle on their finances, see which site is more profitable. I would then recommend that we look at doing some forecasts and what if scenarios. Let's just play with what our options are and see, shake the tree effectively and see what falls out.
Yeah.
And then we can make an informed decision. If one site is more profitable than another, as somebody's already mentioned, it also makes some inquiries about the staff. What are the staff doing while they've been on furlough? Is there just some natural loss that would make their journey a little bit easier?
Can I ask, and this one's probably one for Janet and Sharon, so the rules around furlough is that they couldn't work for that particular business. Were there rules around what they could do, spend their time doing, or was it just you cannot work for the business?
As long as they're not working on that business, that they can effectively. So that's why if you look, so many people who are on furlough have looked at alternatives, have gone into, I don't know, UW or the pyramid
like
sector.
Their own business, or
there's an awful lot of them that. And I think coming out of this, as we have people being made redundant, I think we're going to see some startups where people have used their time while they've been on furlough to do courses, to really upgrade their knowledge, and then think, what do we want to do going forward? So I think we're going to see some startups come out of it, and I think it's just going to be an interesting field.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, we've seen it in the Havering Means Business Group, people just starting businesses up during lockdown, and just using this as an opportunity to say, well, actually, what I wanted to spend the next 10, 15 years doing, because the job might not be it. Now, Sharon, I know, because we do some work together with your clients, that you're very honest with your clients. Talk to me about what honest advice and reality checks you might want to give these guys.
So it's really assessing whether there is a future for them in this. So that may be a tough call, and it may be if they can't make the adjustments needed to changing the type of vehicles they're selling, changing the way they operate, then it's possibly a tough call, and look at what maybe they need to have a look at other options for going forward. It's tough, but and the next piece of advice is they don't seem to have much information on their business finances. If you're going to go into any kind of business, and I'm sure Janet will back this up, it's crucial that you know what your position is. You've got to know what it costs you to open your doors of a morning. If you can't pinpoint what it costs you to open the doors, how do you know where your break-even point is?
How do you know you're making profit?
To make money? You've got to have a handle on these figures, and so many businesses historically, bookkeeping has been done. I'm stating our industry here, sorry, Janet, but bookkeeping has been done in order to provide a client with a VAT return. That's not the point of bookkeeping. VAT return is a byproduct. The point of bookkeeping is to give a business owner some in-depth and detailed numbers analysis, not just here's your VAT return, because that's all we do. We should work for HMRC, because all we do is give out the business owners tax bills.
But this is the interesting thing, isn't it? The technology now allows us to have a real good handle in a really easy way. And I mean, the way that we do it, and certainly it hasn't always been this way, but it's been a lot more effective since we've done it. The way we do it is as soon as the tax year ends, you know, it's 2 months after the accountants, we know what a corporation tax is before we actually make our first payment on account. And actually that allows us to do a decent amount of planning and contingency, you know, keeping cash and stuff like that. Do you think that,
if we can give our business owners some notice of their liability, if we're not doing their year-end accounts 8 months and 28 days before the due for filing, that's just ridiculous.
yeah.
Why can they not be done within a couple of months of the year end? There is no reason. Tax doesn't have to be left to the last minute. Why do
we shouldn't blame the accountants though, Sharon. Sometimes that is the business owners getting the data together, right?
For me, the duty of care is on us as accountants and on our industry to make sure that we work with our clients in a way that they cooperate.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, it's an education process, isn't it? That's the thing.
Absolutely, make it easy for them, and then you're not pushing water uphill all the time.
Yeah. True. Okay, great stuff. Thank you for that. And that, you know, I suppose the other thing, and something I want to raise at the end, is Danny and Mandy need to make a choice whether they're prepared to invest the time, effort, and energy to change the business, because that might be a longer term game, mightn't it? So that's an interesting one. Raymond, thoughts and recommendations for this particular guys in this case study?
What I was going to say is that I think they need to have a joined up plan, an end-to-end model, which is, yes, you can have a business plan on what it's going to look like and what the change is going to be, but what does that mean for you? And the bit in the middle is, what does it mean for them? And you're absolutely right about whether they've actually got the energy and the emphasis and the kind of motivation to make the change. One of the ways which I do with clients is, given they have 2 young children, is you put everything in the context of where your children are, at what age they are, and ask them to think about life and business in the context of where their children are. So 10 years from now, their children are going to be ready to do their A-levels or GCSEs, and think of it in that context.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think part of it is, you know, if we're linking somebody's personal plan, and you know the work we do is helping people get to that level of financial independence, a lot of that is linked to when their kids are going to be potentially not dependent anymore, because that's when they want that level of financial freedom to start enjoying it. But it's interesting. So yeah, link it to the kids.
Yeah, because the one question I ask now, most of my business owners I work with are male, and the one question I ask them is, who do you want to be a hero to? And who they want to be a hero to is their children. Now, what does a hero look like to your children? Turning up at school events, doing all of these things, is that what a hero looks like? The opportunity when you're making any change in your business is to take it in from a holistic perspective and align what matters to you with it. So
yeah, and there's always an element. So Cass is really good at doing this to me, Raymond, because she'll so I'm tomorrow, I've got a busy day today, but tomorrow I'm off in the morning because I'm doing a cooking lesson with Sophie because it's half term. But there's an element of me, and this is where it comes on to the coaching element of what you do, that says, you should be working, Chris. You know, it's a Wednesday morning. You should be at the desk. And there's always that element of, I agree with you, by the way, you know, I'd rather those memories of kids, and as long as you're getting the balance right, I don't see any issue with doing that. But how do those conversations sometimes go when sometimes we're told that the role model should be the provider?
Yeah, and well, part of it is what do they think, most business owners, what do you think you're missing when you're not in the office? What is it that you think is going to happen when you're not there? One of my very early clients was, I just want to go and pick my girls up from sports day on a Wednesday afternoon. So why don't you go? Well, I could do this. It's like, well, that's going to be there when you get home or when you come in the morning. Just why don't you do it once, see what it's like the one time that you do it, and then just once you've done it, see how you feel and what happened. And it's almost that do things slowly, little bit by little bit, make the change, and then they kind of feel like it becomes habit, doesn't it? It's the old, it just becomes habit, doesn't it? And then you kind of think, well, I'm not. We'll give you they just feel like it becomes the norm. Once it becomes the norm, they just don't think about it anymore.
Yeah, I like the question. What are you going to remember in 10 years' time? You know, if we're worried about stuff now, is it going to be the stuff that we're going to regret not doing, or actually, and those jobs potentially aren't the ones that you're going to remember in 10 years' time. Potentially, the cooking lesson might be.
The alternative, and I say to clients, is go and ask your kids.
Yeah.
Go and ask your kids. No matter how old they are, they have a context for how they see their relationship with their dad. Just ask them, and it might be, can you read me a story at night? It could be something really, really simple.
Yeah.
And that's the context which I think would be, when you make a change like this, you have the opportunity to change the way you engage.
So tell me a story about when somebody's asked their kids and changed their perspective. That's really interesting to me.
So I have a client I've been working with for a few years where worked all the time, and 18 months ago he took his kids overseas for the first time ever. Now his kids are, well, they're 14 and 11 now, I think they are, something a similar age to mine, and he just couldn't get his head around it. They came back off of holiday, and I said, "Oh, what's the conversation now?" And he goes, "Oh my," so he's like, "Oh, well, I can't believe it. The question the kids are asking is, where are we going next year?" And he was horrified. He was like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, "Well, what did you expect them to be talking about?" So he's like, "Oh, well, it's going to cost about this much money." And so it's priority in your business, yes, to ensure that money comes out. The conversation was, "Oh, well," I said, "Well, let me put this in a different context. There'll be a time when you come home from work and your suitcase will be by the door and you will go, 'Oh my God,' and your wife, and you'll suddenly realize you're not going on holiday tomorrow." That is the extreme alternative to this.
Or your kids don't want to anymore.
Yeah. Or yes, flip side, yes.
So it's interesting. I took my eldest to Japan a couple of years ago. We were planning a trip, funny enough, 2020 around Europe, and we carve out the time to do that because Raymond, she was 15 then, she's 17 now, but you know, there'll be a point where she goes, "Dad, you're I mean, I'm a cheesy dad at the best of times, Raymond, so the fact that she still wants to travel with me is great, but there will be a point where she'll go, I'm doing my own thing." And those memories are.
And so listening to Janet and Sharon and like James and Ian and that, the bit that makes business really fun is when you have this conversation.
Yeah.
When you have the conversation about what matters and how the experiences are, and invest in the experience. So if the experience is going on holiday as a family, invest in creating the experiences. And
I don't think you can have those technical conversations without understanding about the motivations. You know, the motivations and understanding, you know, what makes people tick comes first, and then you can use our portfolio of skills to build something that's right. And that's the key factor, isn't it? Getting somebody, and the challenge, I think, and we've been guilty of doing it on Inner Circle in previous months, is you go, right, this is what the business needs, without going, this is what the individual needs. You know, what is your game plan, and how do we make sure the business is a tool to do that? I think the challenge you've got is, and Janet alluded to it, is probably in all our businesses, it's not just about the money for us. There are values that we bring to our businesses that are deeply personal. And it's aligning those two things, isn't it? It's an interesting one.
I think that's what COVID's in a way given us a chance to do this because we've had more time with our families. I think for the majority of us, we've realised we actually quite like our families and we like spending time with them.
Yeah.
So going forward, that is a bigger priority.
But then, I mean, because I know Josh, Sharon, you know, that having that relationship, and potentially, and it's certainly the work that Raymond does. You know, Charlotte's already told me that she wants to come and do her own thing, and that I'm like super relaxed about that. But just there are, for me, the values that I live by personally, I try to have in the business as well. And that means that sometimes I do make emotional business decisions because it is personal to me. And it's squaring that circle, isn't it? It's an interesting one. But yeah, you're right. Lockdown's had its challenges. I don't know how everybody else has found. Lockdown's had its challenges, but one of the massive advantages is really spending time with people I love. You know, it's been amazing for that.
Josh thinks he's going off to Australia. I haven't told him I've got a ball and chain out in the shed. He's going nowhere.
Well, you know what? We did it on. I hosted a meeting last Friday and we talked about it. I've just literally clients, the family, everybody I speak to. What's our net first travel trip that we're going to book once we know where we're going to go? So yeah, it gets you when you can't do it. It makes you realise how important it is, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Chris, the other word that we've kind of bandied around a little bit today, but it's really important from both the personal and the business aspect, is honesty. It's being honest with yourself as much as anything else. What is it that you really want?
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to see change in narrative is when when they talk about lifestyle businesses, it's said in such a derogatory way, or it's implied in such a derogatory way. And as I say to my clients, the first thing your business needs to provide you before you go any further is a lifestyle. You need to actually, your business needs to actually give you what you need in the first instance before you decide whether you want to be a multi-million corporation on the moon. And it's nothing wrong with being small and beautiful. Absolutely.
The challenge you've got is that perception of success, isn't it?
Yes.
So success should be about, am I happy with what I've got, and does it help me live the life that I want to live? And that's why you can't disconnect the life you want to live to the business you've got. They need to be an aligned proposition.
You always have to do it the other way. It's what are your personal goals? Where do you want to go personally? And then what does the business have to do in order for you to take that personal journey? Yes. You've got to turn it on its head now.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because sorry, James, come on.
No, I was going to say, because I've worked for a number of different companies in the city and then self-employed, and it has taken me a number of years to realise that owning my own company, and I forget who mentioned it earlier, you've got that real sense of pride, and the business has been going for 14 months, but now it's a case of I can't keep really working 12, 14-hour days. It's about getting the right priority and implementing the right systems, because I'm still very old school. You know, I take a lot of notes and I'm writing things down, and even when I leave a voicemail with a client, I will record what I've said in the voicemail. It's just how I operate, but it's trying to get these processes in place and getting that balance of quality of life as well. You don't want to get to the end of the week where you're exhausted and you're just asleep all weekend and you start again Monday. So it's I love what Raymond's been saying. Yeah.
I mean, there's two elements of that, isn't there? I mean, I suppose like what we've learned over time, and we started 11 years ago with just me and a laptop going, you know, I think I'm a good financial advisor, but I don't know anything about running the business, to a boutique lifestyle business, a business that works for me with a team supporting me. So it doesn't mean to be that you've got to stay on your own in a lifestyle business. It can just be, you know, your definition of what works for you. But I suppose the other thing is, particularly in professional practice, systems, processes, delegation is important, isn't it? I think we all know that. And hopefully, I mean, what I want to do is I'm I'm reticent to change a format that's so interesting, but one inner circle I'm going to run later in the year is all going to be around professionals sharing best practice about works for their business, because there's stuff that I'm sure that I could learn from Raymond and, sorry, I say learn, I mean still. There's stuff that I can, there's stuff that I can magpie from everybody in the room about how we improve our systems, processes, technology, and share. And I know that James, you've had some of our stuff, haven't you? Like discovery documents and stuff like that, which
I don't know everything, and I'm glad I don't. That's the whole part of the journey. It's learning, picking up things, and I've actually really enjoyed this little. So I really do appreciate me, inviting me onto this. It's nice to just generally get other people's ideas. It's taken my mind off work for an hour and a half, and then it's quite nice to have the little breakups. And I think I need to do that more. It's not. It's okay to move someone to a couple of weeks' time to see them, to balance that. Otherwise, you're going to get burnout, aren't you? And
it's working on and working in, isn't it? Like sort of getting that balance right.
I'm conscious. I still need to have a chat with Ian as well. Ian reached out to me a number of months ago, and I haven't really been in contact with him following up with something. So I do apologise, Ian.
I'll let you go.
It's kind of work, James, in all honesty, so don't worry about it.
No, I know.
Good stuff. Paul, talk to me about what you'd be.
Right. Yeah, I am. I apologise, no video for some reason. It's quite a new computer, so it's probably beyond my IT skills, but I'll sort it later. I would echo a lot of what people said, and I think COVID has definitely made people more reflective. And there's lots of stories of people sort of downsizing, moving out to the countryside, finally buying that little small holding in Devon and all that sort. It's because you're suddenly given the time, to actually think about things. You've got more time, whatever. And I think, as somebody once said, I don't know anybody who on their deathbed said, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. Nobody, do they really want that? Only the very sad people who have nothing else in their lives. And it is about balance, isn't it? I'm sure some of you will have done the wheel of life, where you look at all your life, and it's your relationships, your business, your career, or your business, what have you, your health, your fitness, all. And if they're out of kilter, then there's something not right. And it's very difficult when you're building a business, because I remember when I started mine, I had two very small children when I first started. So the first sort of year was about survival, absolute survival. And of course, it was to do, to look after the wife and children. And then you just get over that. You get a bit more confidence and so forth. And then eventually, and that's probably why I sold my business, I really want to do other things. But I think I would say in this instance, back to this particular case study, which is really interesting, this could well be a new business, which is sprung up. Somebody mentioned the whole, I think Janet was saying how we're moving towards a much more aware, thank goodness, sustainable economy. And cars are one of the areas which are perhaps one of the worst pollutants. And if these guys got this right, they could actually become experts in that. And they've got all these showrooms, which they may or may not need. But it's still a very, very new concept, and people don't understand, how you recharge things and what's the best thing and so on and so forth. So I think that they have a good opportunity, provided they all sit around the table and say, well, what do we all want out of this? And you've got the founder of the car business is just dying to become a non-executive director by the look of it. And the other chap who's, always got time in his hand. They all bring a lot of expertise and skill.
But the point you raised, Paul, that's interesting is that positioning, isn't it? How do they position their, like? I mean, Janet's going to kill me for mentioning auto enrollment again. But back in 2012, it's funny that positioning. I mean, I started doing some corporate work for some corporate clients back in 2012, 2013 when it all started. And I wrote a book available in no good bookshops in 2015 about automatic enrolment. Right. But that positioning of that market actually won us some really good corporate clients. And it's, I think that ability to pivot is
absolutely.
Ian, I used it, I won't use it again. That ability to pivot and position is increasingly important in sectors that are changing.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, it's a bit of a truism, but I mean, there's a huge amount of money going from governments into, you know, sustainability. So if they actually got out there and said, right, well, we're not going to sort of, it's the old Boston, you know, sort of a cash cow. You know, we're going to milk the petrol market for as long as possible. Well, actually, change your mind. You say pivot, find the people who want, because I think most people, particularly if you've got children or grandchildren, as I have, actually are really passionate about this. I mean, I've been into recycling for many years, and organic veg and all that sort of stuff in your own small way. So you're pushing into an open door, really. So they could, but people are a bit confused. I mean, people don't know, you know, the whys and wherefores of electric cars. They all sound very great, but actually it's how you drive them. Apparently, it's, you know, if you drive them too fast, you don't get the battery power. So if they became a real hub of excellence for that sort of thing, I think you might find there's a real opportunity there.
But there's a broader cultural trend as well, isn't there? You know, it's not only electric cars; it's sustainable energy.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, gets them into other things. Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate that. Okay, so we're sort of coming to the end of the session. We've got another 20 minutes, and I'm sure we'll go off on a couple of tangents in the next 20 minutes. So I'll do the last round robin. Ian, final thoughts about anything that's been talked about today?
I think I'm going to go back to this overall scheme of honesty, and you know, it's come out in various strands of conversations. You know, it's being honest about, as James was saying, who they want to be guardians for their children. All of these things rely on courage, and as business owners, it's something that is probably not given the gravitas that it should have. You know, so with this particular case has given Danny and Mandy potentially huge opportunity, and we've talked, you know, extensively about the EV side of the motor industry, but it offers huge opportunity. But there's got to be a huge step of faith to make that move, unless you've got the right group of people around you. Courage, I think, goes with that honesty.
Do you think that honesty is about being honest with yourself and what you want as well?
Well, yeah, because I mean, also it means, you know, I mentioned before, being a good employee doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good business owner. And it may be Danny says, you know what, this isn't for me, I want to go back. So again, there's a whole different set of conversations that start being had. And does Mr. Guillaume want to sell out? Is this where John comes in? This is it. But this case is just full of opportunity for so many people. But a successful outcome relies on honesty and courage.
Yeah. What do you want, and can we potentially work together to get there? Yeah. Okay, great. That's amazing. Thank you. And I suppose that raises one extra question. Sort of, and again, it goes back to a theme that's been recurring throughout the thing is authenticity, isn't it? You know, has the nature of business changed so that now it's more important to be authentic than ever?
I think so. You know, it's the age-old thing, isn't it? People buy from people. If they don't get you as a person, if they believe there's a smokescreen, they'll be wary.
Thanks, Ian. Appreciate that. Janet, what themes and topics do you think have been most pertinent?
Yeah, I think, you know, you really said some things that really sort of resonated with me. You know, we've covered so far, and just something that really did sort of strike me was that, you know, when we all started out in business, we were probably good at what we do. Doesn't mean we were very good at running a business. And I think, you know, that sort of runs through. I see that with a lot of business that I work with. You know, I'd get a carpenter come, he's a fantastic carpenter, and now all of a sudden he's got to run a business, and that is a huge learning curve for a lot of people, and equally for me, I had a bit of a thing. So I don't think I'm a very good employer, because I just don't. I'm not always comfortable with being an employer, and the team that I work with, they do sort of wind me up about this a little bit. But one of the more recent ladies that works with me, she's quite an old friend of mine, but she had quite a senior role in the public sector, but sadly she had to take. She had to leave because of ill health, but it didn't mean that she couldn't still work. And she sort of come to me and said, look, I'm just so bored at home. She's got multiple master's degrees, and she said, I just want to do something. I just come in and do your filing or whatever it is. It's like, well, yeah, great, that'd be really helpful. So she started literally just about 2 months before lockdown. She started.
I don't know why, Janet, but I'm just thinking about the word overqualified.
Oh, hugely. I was embarrassed.
But she wanted some purpose. She wanted to.
I was literally embarrassed. And I said, look, I feel bad giving you this work. She's like, no, I just want to do something. So she came in one day a week and she started doing a bit of admin and stuff and setting some systems up and stuff. And the skills she brought to me were incredible. But on top of that, she just used to keep telling me off. She'd be like, I'd go out and maybe meet a client, and she's like, you haven't told anyone where you're going. I'm like, well, do I need to? Like, well, yeah. I mean, you need to. This is safeguarding. You need to say where you're going. I'm like, oh, okay. And then you used to tell us where you are, what time you're coming back. Okay. She goes, why aren't you finding out? I've got another lady who goes off to another place. She says, why don't you know where she is? I said, well, I don't want to thinking I'm checking up on her. Just, that's not the point. You have to safeguard these people. And do you know what? She was right. I was lacking in these skills.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And she's, yeah. And I think you, like you say, you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't realise I was lacking in these things until someone, actually told me, you're not doing your job right.
So I'm a bit with you on this one. I think that I'm a poor employer, not poor. I do try my best, right? That's my starting point. But I think the challenge that I've got is understanding employees' perspective when you're the business owner. That's the big one for me. You're running it and you've got the responsibility on your shoulders. And like sometimes my starting point with any relationship is try to understand and then communicate. But sometimes I'm responsible in my own business of not doing that and just putting my priorities first. And now I'm probably guilty of that, to be honest. It's something that I'm conscious of. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah,
hugely. It's just that whole perspective, isn't it, of seeing it from that point of view, and it was like something's lifted, and like, okay, now I can see what I should be doing, and
it's what's interesting is because before Cassie joined the business, she used to work in children's services, so she understands safeguarding implicitly. But it's probably something we don't do with our team, particularly during lockdown. Yeah, it's interesting. So that's my even before I run my inner circle where we share ideas. That's the first one I'm magpieing. So thank you for that, Janet. But yeah, what can you business owners not being good operators, but not being good business owners? How important do you think delegation is in that respect?
I think it's hugely.
Raymond's nodding.
Yeah, hugely important, but not very easy to delegate. Again, I think it's quite hard because you start off doing everything yourself, and then gradually you've got to start letting go and trusting people without then implicitly checking it all again.
Well, and on this call, we've all got business owners at different stages and clients who are at different stages in that, haven't we? So it's interesting. Thanks, Janet. Appreciate that. James, talk to me about what themes you think have come up.
So I think by talking about the case study, it really shows that all of our industries can have some sort of input and add real value to the client.
100%.
And I also think that the more I network, the more important it is to have the power. I'll just use the word power teams, but the power teams around us, because we're all here to provide a service, and I genuinely care about every single person I deal with. But I never want to feel like I'm selling. So I think that when I get a referral, there's a need, and I can address that. What I don't want to start doing is, if I'm going to start putting weeks and doing reports and getting to know them and finding out this and that and connecting with them, other people, if it's just a numbers game and they're just wanting a quote, well, we've got some standard fees, I can give you them. But that's why I think it's important about networking and getting past something at the right time. I don't want to speak to someone and they say to me, oh, I've been told I need a will. Well, no, you don't. Well, you should, but you don't. It's about time we do something. And I think that's important. And then I don't know everything, and I've got a team that can help as well, and the other professionals and contacts I can introduce them to. And it's building up that relationship with people, I think, is key for the client.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, my approach to networking's changed, and I don't do as much open networking now than I probably did in the early days, because what I'm interested in is deeper relationships with fewer people than wider relationships with lovely people, but people where I can't see a professional collaboration. So I do my fair share, and I try and support businesses where I can, but I think it'd be interesting to get everybody else's perspective on it. But when time is that commodity that you've got less of, how do you use it most effectively? And I think deep relationships, as opposed to broad relationships, are different.
Quality, not quantity.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks, James. And I completely agree. Collaboration is where it's at. Sharon, your themes of the day.
A couple of points. One is, I think as business owners, you almost become an amateur psychologist, because you really have to understand your team. You have to understand what makes each person tick in order to be able to A, reward them appropriately, and B, get the best out of them, because different strokes, different folks, they respond to different things. So you've really got to understand your team before you can really make that a meaningful relationship.
But in professional services, psychology and I mean, that I'm a bit of an amateur social psychologist and I read loads of books on this anyway, but understanding how people think and make decisions is key, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the other point is on business owners. So I did a stint with QuickBooks, dare I say QuickBooks, in the state in 2015. And they had a poetic speaker on stage, a guy called Siku Andrews. And the clip's actually on YouTube. And he's really, really comical. He was just there, basically highlighting a point that when you start your business, you are everything, aren't you? You're the procurement person, you're the tea maker, you're the receptionist, you're the salesman, you're the chief finance officer, you're the chief executive, and then your business evolves. And you can't be all these things. So you have to start just letting go a little bit and pick a team around you that takes some of this so that you can do what you're best at. So it's a question of how much does it cost you to be ordering the stationery and making the tea? Because what aren't you earning whilst you're doing that? Yeah. And if the particular example here, because it was obviously an accounting thing, is if you're doing your own bookkeeping, how much is that costing you?
100%. Just get rid of what you can and get the experts to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you, Sharon. Really appreciate that. Raymond, thoughts in terms of themes for you?
Just picking up on what Sharon was saying and what you say about delegation, I think it's as important, if not more important, who you work with rather than what you ask them to do. Because one of the biggest challenges when you start your business is the angst of letting it go. So if you talk to someone and work with someone who you actually form a relationship with, then actually letting it go, whilst it's challenging, it becomes easier with time rather than going for a transactional relationship.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we're not recruiting en masse, but our team was built on existing relationships. So relationships we didn't. Every time we've recruited through a recruitment consultant, we've failed in getting the link right, because you don't get enough understanding of the values of that individual. So Herb, for example, one of the members of my team that many of you know and have spoken to, got introduced to me through a client of mine who was his employment coach. and he'd just finished a financial planning degree at Manchester University, and turned up to my office in his suit. Bless him. I was wearing I haven't worn a tie in like 10 years, so I don't know why he turned up wearing a tie, but he wanted to make a good impression. And you know what he did? He told me the story of like what he was about and what was important to him. And I thought, actually, you will fit in the business. And that I think was interesting, because at the time he was there for me to do an element of coaching with him to help him get a career. And then an opportunity came up 6 months later and we offered him a job. So it's interesting about how that impacts how you recruit, right?
Yeah, it does. And I think for this group, I think one of the things I believe that you will see, and I encourage my own clients, is that the core of your business should be small. And that if you think of it in the physics environment, those that spin around you, have more people spinning around you who provide the right kind of skills and services and interact with you in the way that you want in a part-time basis. Have someone who you need, who you really want to work with you half a day a month, rather than employing someone in your business who you optimize, who you work with like to 20% or 30% capacity. So actually keep a small core and engage the professionals who and the coaching and the development, all the skills that you actually need to put forward, but know who you are at your best as a CEO and start from that place. And don't be shy. We encourage our children. This is why I talked to a couple of business owners last week. We encourage our children to be who they are, stand up, shine a light, be everything. They go into the world positively, and as parents we go, yeah, go for it, and as business owners we go, yeah, but you know. And it's like, no, if that's it, if you are the creative who draws on the wall, be the creative who draws on the wall and find what you need around you in a way that works for you.
I mean, it's really interesting, right? So I was on a call this morning with Ian and Janet, and actually Sharon was on there as well, where I started talking about, we were talking about Wim Hof and the Iceman method. And I was talking about running naked through Havering, right? Now, that isn't going to fly. I know, it's not a sight anybody wants to see. And I promise you, anybody who lives near me, I'm not going to be doing it. But what I've learned over the years is I'll lose clients because of the way I am, and I'm relaxed about that. But the right clients who really want a personal and professional relationship, you know, we think we're pretty good at what we do. But if you want somebody to actually engage with on a personal level, not going to be right for everybody, but I want to be right for some. I think that's the fear sometimes, Raymond, is upsetting people, isn't it? You know, yes. And that's what stops that sometimes more personal engagement.
It's that saying, isn't it, that you can't be something to everybody, but you can be something to somebody.
I think the challenge you've got is that something to everybody is the blandest version of yourself.
Exactly.
You know, and that's that's, and it goes back to that values conversation, doesn't it? Do you want to live your life that way?
Well, the best example on the high street is Marmite, because what did they release recently? Marmite and peanut butter. And you're kind of looking at it going, you're either going to look at it and go, that's definitely for me, or you can look at it and go, actually, I'm not touching that with a barge pole.
Wasn't it chili? Wasn't it a chili version or something?
Version as well? Oh my Lord.
Yeah, I mean, there was one that was on social media recently. I can't remember. It was baked beans on cereal or something. Weetabix was, yeah. Weetabix and beans or something like that. And it created a bit of a storm where every other food brand was commenting on Weetabix's stuff. So yeah, a bit of an element of keeping professional but making it personal as well is important. Thanks, Raymond. Appreciate that. Paul, thoughts on themes of the day?
Great, thank you. Yes, well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. It's the first session, and I've really enjoyed it. And despite my little interludes of not being around, a couple of things really. I mean, I think you're right about the whole networking thing. It's it's going in depth rather than too broad. And I'm not knocking BNI. I've been involved occasionally, but it's a bit mechanistic, and you're forced to come up with referrals every month. So you're referring your granny for a new washer on the tap or something, just to have a referral, or some people seem to do. I think the other thing that's come out for me is, I know you mentioned the 80s previously, but this is a band from the 90s. That's the Spice Girls. They said, you know, what do you want? What do you really, really want? And I think, you know, several people have mentioned this. Let's have honest conversations about what you want as business owners, and when you're talking to clients, what have you. And that's often very difficult. People don't actually say what they really want, or there are other pressures on them and so forth, and they often feel they can't actually express themselves. That's a bit too, well, you know, they have to get on with the business first. So I think if you get that right, that's going to be helpful. And the other thing is about succession. I think if you look back at Microsoft, Bill Gates, he was actually quite forward-thinking in many ways. He was a computer genius, and still is, I guess. But he recognised quite early on he wasn't a managing director, and he brought in Steve Ballmer, I think it was. And look at Microsoft. You know, history tells the tale. So I think it is about being honest with yourself. About actually sometimes just because you started the business doesn't mean to say you should run it. So if it means you pass on to somebody else or whatever, fine. That shouldn't be an ego problem. That's actually
it's a skill set. It's a
yeah, absolutely.
But then it goes back to Ian's theme, doesn't it? You know, honestly admitting where you're good and where you might not
be. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Amazing, Paul. Thank you. And extra points for getting the 90s Spice Girls reference. Amazing. you have ruined my sort of case study for next month. I'll have to find another band containing 5 members now. But yeah.
Very good.
But thank you again. I love these sessions. Really enjoy a lot of them. Thanks for attending. Really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll catch up with a lot of you soon, and have a lovely month, and you'll get an invite for next month's Inner Circle. See you later.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Okay.